Now in this lesson, we want to talk about something called the distributive property. The distributive property, we multiply the outside number with every number or variable inside the parentheses. So let's look at what does that mean. That means in this problem, it's telling me to multiply the 2 times the x. And it's telling me to take the 2 and multiply it times the 3. So when I do that, I get 2x plus 6. And I've performed the distributive property. So in our problem here, it's missing a parentheses there, I put it in. It's telling me to take the 4 and multiply it times the x. Now take the 4 and multiply it times the 7. And when I do that, I get 4x minus 28. So that is what the distributive property is. And the distributive property can only be performed on a addition problem or a subtracting problem. That's the only time you can perform the distributive property, with an addition problem or a subtraction. So now let's look at these 3 problems. We're being asked to perform the distributive property. So we're asked to take a negative 5 and multiply it times y. And we're being asked to take a negative 5 and multiply it times 1. So we get a negative 5y. And then we get a negative 5. Okay. The next one, they're asking us to take a negative 3 and multiply it times the x. Take a negative 3 and multiply it times 1. So when I do that, I get a negative 3x minus 3. Okay. Now our next one. They're telling me to take a negative 8 and multiply it times a. And take a negative 8 and multiply it times 3. Okay. Negative 8. So that gives me a negative 8a minus a negative 8 times 3 gives me a negative 24. And now we're going to clean this up. Minus a negative 24 is the same as negative 8a plus 24. Okay, so let's try this again. Now they're asking us to perform the distributive property here. They're asking us to take a negative 2 and multiply it times m, minus take a negative 2 and multiply it times 3. A negative 2 times m gives me a negative 2. Bring down the subtracting sign, and a negative 2 times 3 gives me a negative 6. And now minus a negative 6 is negative 2 plus 6. Okay. Next problem, take a negative 3 and multiply it times m, minus take a negative 3 and multiply it times 9. Negative 3m. I forgot to put the m behind those. Sorry about that. Negative 3m minus negative 3 times 9 is a negative 27. And then minus a negative 27, that would be a negative 3m plus 27. Negative 6 times m minus a negative 6 times 2. That gives me a negative 6m minus a negative 12, and that would give me a negative 6m plus 12. Okay. Now, some people see it that way, and some people like this method. Negative 2 times the m, and then negative 2 times, it's the same thing, but now they're just using arrow to do it. Okay, negative 2 times m, negative 2 m. Negative 2 times 3 is minus a negative 6. And minus a negative 6 is the same thing as a negative 2m plus 6. So same answer, just a different way of doing it. Once again, if you like this method, arrow, arrow. This would give me a negative 3m minus a negative 27. And so that would be a negative 3m plus 27. Negative 6 times m, and negative 6 times a negative 2. Negative 6 times y is minus negative 6y, minus a negative 6 times 2, and that would be a negative 6y minus a negative 12, which is a negative 6y plus 12. Same thing I got here. Okay. Now in this exercise, we're being asked to perform both combined like terms and the distributive property. So in order to do these, the first thing we're going to do is remove the parentheses by performing the distributive property. So how does that look? Okay, let me get my marker here. It's telling me to do this part of the problem first. We're to do that part first by performing the distributive property. And I get 8 plus 10x minus 15. Okay. Now we're going to rewrite the problem. 8 minus 15 plus 10x. And so now we're looking at 8 minus 15, okay, which gives you a negative 7 plus 10x. And once again, how did I get that negative 7? I went 8 minus 15, which is 8 plus a negative 15. Okay, so that's how we get the negative 7. So now they're asking me to perform the distributive property. So we're being asked to do that part of the problem first. So what I'm going to do is bring down that 9 and then perform the distributive property. So that gives me 12x plus 20. Now, when we look at our last problem here, they want me to perform the distributive property here. So I rewrite negative 3x, and when I perform the distributive property there, I get plus 2x minus 14. And now combine the like terms, I get a negative 1x minus 14, or you can just say a negative x minus 14. So now let's look at these two problems here. So we're going to perform the distributive property. But what are we going to perform the distributive property on? We're going to perform the distributive property here. I'm going to rewrite the negative 10x minus 3x. And now I'm going to perform the distributive property here. I get a negative 30x minus 25. Okay, perform the distributive property. Now I have three like terms. I have a negative 10x minus 3x. That gives you a negative 13x minus 30x minus 25. Combine these two terms together, I get a negative 33x minus 25. Now we're going to perform the distributive property among that. Rewrite this. We get 18x minus 3x. Perform the distributive property. Minus 8x plus 28. Combine the like terms here, which will give me 15x minus 8x plus 28. Okay. Now we need to subtract that. And now when we subtract these, make sure you get 7x plus 28. Okay. So now let's look at our last problem here. Now we're going to perform the distributive property here. So we have 10 minus 6x minus 21 plus 5x. 10 minus 21 minus 6x plus 5x. See if you can finish the problem. Now your answer should have been 11 minus 1x are negative 11 minus